Greenham Common was an RAF base established in 1942 near the town of Newbury, roughly 55 miles from London. It was used both by the RAF and the United States Army Air Force during the Second World War and later from 1947 during the Cold War. On the 27th of August 1981, 36 women and 4 men, aged between 25 and 80, set off on a march from Cardiff. 10 days later, having covered 120 miles, they arrived here at Greenham Common. During the 1980s, this airfield was the focus of the Women's Peace Camp protest. They were protesting at the storage of nuclear weapons. The storage continued and the protest continued for the next 19 years. The women were protesting on behalf of their children and future generations because they believed so passionately that the safety of these young people was put at risk by the presence of the weapons. Today, 35 years later, this protest is celebrated as one of the most significant feminist movements.
My name is Lynette Edwell. I live in Priory Road, Newbury, and I was involved with the Women's Peace Camp from the time the first women arrived. It was quite interesting because the very big demonstration, Embrace the Base, where 20,000 women plus came, was done more or less by word of mouth and by sending on a chain letter. I never saw the chain letter, I've seen it since. It was just women talking to other women, and no one could have been more surprised than me when the coaches started piling up on the dual carriageway and women just piled into Greenham. I was in an information tent and almost missed the linking hands. The mixed group came from Cardiff walking, and they arrived here in September 1981. It was men, women and children. It was a very long walk, and they stayed at the church in Northbrook Street. They stayed in the church hall for a couple of days, and then they marched through the town to the main gate at Greenham and asked for a debate on cruise missiles being based there, and they were denied it. So they said they would stay there until we got a debate in the House of Commons. There was nothing when they got there. There was absolutely nothing. Women hadn't come prepared. Initially, 1 or 2 women chained themselves to the fence, but as everyone totally ignored them, they just stayed and took the chains off. But all the time, we were trying to make a political debate. We were trying to get publicity. We were trying to get people to discuss it.
Well, when I first moved to Greenham Common, we lived at Bishop's Green, which was just opposite, but the school buses came to pick us up because it was classed as unsafe to walk past the peace campus every day, even though it's probably only a mile walk up the hill into the airbase. So the buses arrived at Bishop's Green, picked us all up, and up we went up the hill, and of course the peace campus would be bashing on the bus and just trying to intimidate everybody, and soldiers would come out and try and restrain them away. So sort of that was every day coming in and out of the peace, past the peace camp. So that was fine, it wasn't too horrific. But as I got older and older, when I was about 12 and 13, then you're independent, you want to walk up there, go to the teen clubs and the cinema and whatever else we had there. So we would have to walk past them, sort of name calling and a bit of banter. But they were always good natured. They were never sort of vicious or mean or threatening. But I suppose when I started off there and I was a little bit younger, going to primary school, it was a little bit more scary, passing the bus and seeing them being restrained and things like that.
There was a snowstorm which stopped the I think it was the BBC, getting to Greenham that day. So they filmed the Newbury campaign walking through the town, and we were actually able to give the publicity for the camp because camp women were with us. In March 82 they decided to go women only because they would all work better without men. But it was a very scary place to be, so it was a really good rule to say no men. So if you heard a man's voice, you would know it was trouble. Now at the same time, once crews came, the launches were going out once a month in the middle of the night. This meant that people like me, we had our ways of knowing when the launch was coming out. We would motivate a telephone tree so that people would come from all over the country, and it would come out between 12 and 1. We would line the route from here to Salisbury Plain, and while it was on Salisbury Plain, cruise watchers would watch it, and then we'd get a message it was coming back, and we'd all go out again in the middle of the night to line the route. We did that for 10 years. So it wasn't just sitting at Greenham, it was actually physically opposing cruise missiles and being a witness, so they could never say it was top secret. And I was part of the press team. We had a system by which I would phone somebody who would phone somebody who would phone somebody. So within, say, 2 hours of me getting back, we would have, the whole country would know, we would let America know, we would let peace camps in Australia, Italy, Canada. We'd let everybody know cruise was out. They would do a demonstration at Salisbury Plain, or else they would do a demonstration where they were. So in Leeds and Manchester and in London, whenever cruise came out, they tried to do a demonstration to let people know what was happening. So it could never be secret.
My dad worked in munitions, but he worked at RAF Welford, and that was where he was sort of, they transported the munitions back and forth and into the bunkers. So I did kind of, when your parents tell you what to do for a living, it's not really an important thing to you then, really. So my dad said he was in munitions, and I said, oh, what do you do then? What do you do, make bombs? And he said, well, yeah, I kind of make them and transport them. And at the time I didn't realise what, a dangerous job that probably was. But, looking back now, I can see that they perhaps had some good reasons to protest. The time that school starts, most of the businesses would kick off, so you'd have all of the traffic, and it was a case of everybody had to show their military ID, boots were checked, they had mirrors checking under the cars in case somebody had tried to, and under the lorries. So there was some days it was pretty bad, there's a bit of a queue to get in. But I think you just got used to it and you kind of accepted it, really. There was different gates you could get into as well. There was a back gate going into Greenham Common, and they didn't seem to protest there. That was over by, it was called Greenham Close then. It's where you can do the park run and access the common ground now to go walking the dogs on and whatever. But then that was all fenced off as well. So if we were in a rush to get into Greenham, we would quite often come into Newbury and then come in via the back gate, which seems silly because it was a 5 miles extra, really. And when the base was closed down, but we had left about a year before, so my dad was doing all of the preparations, and I've got other military relatives that were still there through it all. They had lots of sort of celebrations and stuff, so everybody moving out, and they just said it was sad to see the base closed down, but at the same time, it served its purpose.
So Newbury Council came in, impounded the caravans, took them all away, took the proper toilets away, and gradually in the next few months they made it unlawful to actually stay on the common, but that was difficult because of the common land bit. So it ended up with us having benders. Now a bender is a section, it's a traditional thing, it's a section of a tree that you can pull down and cover in cloth or polythene. Because this was obviously getting to us, the Quakers in the north of England devised something called a getaway, which was a small orange portable tent which you could collapse in a minute with a ground sheet and actually put on your hand. And if the bailiffs took it, because the bailiffs used to come, well, they'd come every day, take everything in the camp unless you stopped them. But because they had the name of the peace group on it, you could reclaim your getaway. So that was a good answer. A lot of women slept in vehicles, and a lot of women slept in the open in Gore-Tex sleeping bags, because you've got a head thing on the top. So women just improvised. But the main thing to realise that in the event of a nuclear war at the time, Russia would simply have fired SS-20s at us, and it would be a war involving Europe, but not America, who had stepped out. And 96, can you think of 96 cities in Europe? Let alone 96 people you'd want to destroy. And that would be it. And it would mean Newbury would not exist. Because even in the event, just the threat of a war, crews and the SS-20s were the ones going to go straight into us. And that would have been it. It just made Newbury a very unsafe place. And the idea they'd go to Salisbury Plain, well, while they're on their way to Salisbury Plain, things are arriving here. What I had, because women would come and stay, I had a lot of things left here. And when Greenham London office closed, a lot of the files were left here. And I thought it would be interesting, instead of writing a history, which would be my perspective, I would compile an archive which told everybody's story. And so it took me several years to get together, and it's now at the Berkshire Records Office, and it's indexed. So people who want to know what an individual woman did can just look it up in the index and go to Berkshire Records Office and get a cutting. West Berkshire Museum at this time was also being replanned, and they were kind enough to take my Greenham coat and hat and my megaphone and some badges. So the paper collection of photographs, newsletters and reports is at the Berkshire Records Office, and the artefacts are at West Berkshire Museum.
The Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, or CND movement as it became known, was a genuine response to the fear that nuclear war could bring about the end of the world. The tension arose between the United States of America and the USSR, at that time, of course, the communist bloc. It was called the Cold War because no shots were actually fired. But both sides were very heavily armed, and it was felt that nuclear war would bring total global devastation. Interestingly, the Greenham protest is now seen as very much part of the fledgling feminist movement. CND itself was dominated and led by men, perhaps because that is a reflection of the world at the time. And at first there was some tension between the Greenham women and the CND men. That did become resolved because the imagination, wit and determination of the Greenham women soon won the respect of everybody. Living conditions at the camp were primitive, being out of doors, sometimes under a single sheet of canvas, and often for long periods of time in all weathers. Perhaps inevitably in such a well-heeled part of Berkshire, there were tensions with local residents, even when meeting at the supermarket. Nevertheless, it was recognised that the protests were very well intentioned. In the end, the camps closed in 1993 when all missiles were moved from Greenham, and this particular period and this story were over.